Greg, what if I told you with enough faith you could fly?
Yeah.
Have you ever had a question that needed to be answered? Well, we're almost going to answer it. Welcome to Questions and Almost Answers, the Bible podcast where you give us questions and we do our very best, and we rely on God to hopefully answer some of these questions. And today we're talking about faith. More specifically, a couple of very interesting passages that Jesus, uh, that he speaks. Greg, what were the exact questions that were given to us on this?
Yeah, these are exciting ones because we're going to teach you all how to get whatever you want whenever you want it.
That is
That's
incredible,
the
Greg.
promise of today. So,
Okay, watch till the end and you'll know exactly how to get anything you want.
yeah. So here's the question.
Oh.
Jesus said, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, then you can say to this mountain, like, be moved, and it'll be moved. In another place, he says, yeah, like, you can toss that mountain into the ocean. Okay.
Mm.
In my book, that's like, you can do anything, right?
Well, yeah.
So, so Jesus is saying, if you have the tiniest amount of faith, you can do anything. So,
Right.
the question is that for real? I'm paraphrasing, but basically the question was, will the mountain actually obey? Like, if you have enough faith, will this actually happen in reality? So that's question one. And the second one is really related to it. Um, if we do have faith, how many times should we pray for something? So let's go back to the
Mm.
mountain illustration. Like, so do you pray that God moves the mountain once and then it moves, or do you have to pray 1,000 times,
Right.
5,000 times? Does a bigger mountain mean more asking before it gets moved? Those are the kind of questions that we're hopefully gonna
Right.
tackle here and give some type of answer.
Greg, I wonder. When I do hear the statement, you could tell that mountain to move and throw it into the ocean. That is a great feat of power. You said, kind of paraphrasing, you could do anything.
Mm.
And my mind starts to think of all the little things I would do with this kind of power. Is this what Jesus was talking about? Like, was he saying, like, actually practically you can do anything? Or
Mm.
what? I don't know. Like this is a passage that I've heard since childhood, and I feel like I don't get it. Like, what's the context to this? Like, I just I have a hard time with this.
Yeah, and you mentioned the word context, and that's actually really important. Like, we're not talking about asking for the ability to fly or simpler things like winning the lottery or a stock going up, or you know what I mean? Like,
Mm,
this is, let me give an illustration of the way we talk like this all the time that I think might be helpful, just to give us a bit of a clearer thought process before we even look at the immediate context. So we're coming up near graduation time, right?
that's right. It's exciting.
And in almost every graduation across our country, if you went and listened, you would hear some variation of you can be anything,
Right.
you can do anything.
Right.
And
Whatever you put your mind to, you'll accomplish.
exactly. And nobody is thinking, okay, that means that I can just, or these grads can instantly create a black hole. Or
Oh,
or these grads can fly, or these
right.
grads can turn themselves into a rhinoceros. Like
Mm,
we understand the context of that. We understand that we're saying that these young people, in the confines of who they are and the skills
mm.
they actually have, right? If they put their mind to something and put their effort into it, there is a real possibility of it happening, right? That's what
Okay.
that's what we're saying to them. We're
Right.
not saying that they can be anything or do anything.
Mm.
Um, but we're saying that, look, with what you have, it is incredible what can be accomplished. Don't
Right.
hold yourself back,
Right.
right? So, so we're using big language, hyperbole. We're exaggerating something to make a real powerful point,
Okay.
right? And so Jesus is just using normal language here, and he's exaggerating. He's using hyperbole here. He's saying, you can move a mountain, right?
Mm.
Mountains move when you trust God, right?
Right.
Um, Now, I don't know of any illustration of mountains actually moving,
Moving.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But, but the reality is that incredible things have happened in response to faith, and I would go so far as saying a little mountain moved, right? Jesus died, was buried, rose again. A piece of a mountain, a rock, it
Right.
was in
Around.
front
Yeah.
of that tomb, and it rolled away, right?
Yeah.
If they had put a mountain in front of that tomb, well, the mountain would have rolled away, right?
Mm.
Because God's plan was for Jesus rising from the dead, for that to be seen, for that to
Right.
be public. So it didn't matter what they put in front of it. They could have put a whole mountain, right?
Mm.
Um, and and God would have rolled it away, right? So there is truth in the sense that in the context of what Jesus was saying. Well, let's look at the context because this is really helpful.
This is fascinating.
Here's why Jesus said this. So Jesus had given the disciples the ability to do the miracles he was able to do, and
Mm.
he had sent them out
To go and
to actually
heal and to, yeah.
right and to cast out demons specifically was one of the things that he empowered them to do. Now, there was a young boy that was had this demon possession going on in his life. The family brought that boy to the disciples for them to heal, which is something that they've been instructed to do. They had the power to do, and they couldn't. It didn't
Mm.
work. So the family brings the boy to Jesus. And here's what Jesus said. Jesus said, "You faithless and corrupt people, how long must I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." Um, this is some pretty harsh.
Come on, guys. Who are
Yeah.
you? Bring them to me. I'll let me do this.
Why do I put up with you?
Yeah.
Slack bunch of people, right? Like Jesus is really calling them out
Yeah.
publicly. Like this is some harsh stuff. Then Jesus rebuked the demon in the boy, and it left him. From that moment on, the boy was well. Afterwards, the disciples asked Jesus privately, "Why couldn't we cast out this demon?"
Mm.
Um, and this is where Jesus says, "You don't have enough faith." I tell you the truth, if you had faith even as small as a mustard seed, you could say to this mountain, "Move from here to there," and it would move. Nothing would be impossible.
Mm.
So, so we got to understand again that the context is these people that we call the disciples, they were apprentices of Jesus. Jesus was giving them the authority, the power, and the training to be what he was
Right.
character-wise and to do what he did in in the public in their ministry. So Jesus walked on water, well, Peter did too, right?
Mm.
Jesus healed the sick, well, they did too, right? Jesus confronted the spiritual world behind some of the destruction and horrors that we see in the world. Well, they were instructed and empowered to do that too.
Right.
But on that one, they weren't sure, right?
Huh.
That one shook them a little bit.
Right.
And in this case, they didn't believe in some way, right? And the word that's used here where it says you faithless, it's stronger than saying you're not convinced.
Right.
Um, it, the idea is to actually um, be intentionally unbelieving, to refuse to believe is the way
Mm.
one lexicon put that word. Like it's digging in your heels a little bit, right?
Like, oh, that that can't be. No, like I can't.
Right.
I don't. I'm not. I don't know if I want that to happen.
Yeah, and I'm not so if we could put this into context, it could be God's maybe leading you into something. People in leadership are encouraging you to go into something and you say, "No, it's not for me."
Mm.
Then that's being faithless,
Right.
right? God's clearly leading and instructing. Those around you are leading and instructing, and you're saying, "Nope, not for me,"
Mm.
right? That's kind of what was happening here with the disciples, and the illustration Jesus uses explains their faithlessness, right?
Mm.
Just like you would say, I can't really move a mountain. Like,
Right.
I'm just Greg, you're just Matt.
I could never. I could never call a demon out of someone.
That's right. I have
Yeah.
no authority. I have no capacity for that. Matter of fact, it makes me freaked out a little. I don't even want
Right.
to be in this situation. Um, and no doubt the disciples were feeling some of this, right? That they were
Mm.
feeling like inadequate, scared. I don't want to be in the same space as this boy. Right? And so there was a refusal to step up to what Jesus had told them to do. And here's where I think our definition of faith becomes important, that it's not simply just believing. The other side of the faith coin is obedience.
Mm. So
Like,
it's doing
right.
alongside that. So you not just that you believe it or you have the knowledge of that it's possible. You're convinced, like you said,
Mhm.
but it's acting on that too.
Right. It's like James said, like faith without works is dead. That you say you have faith, big deal, right?
Mm.
Show that
Show
faith
it.
by your actions. And so um, the the combination of these two are really significant. And the disciples were failing on that in this
Mm.
situation. And so it I don't know what they were struggling with internally, but there's hints in this where Jesus said, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, they might have been questioning their ability, right, to muster enough
Mm.
faith for this to happen. Or it could have been the other side. They could have been trusting themselves, right? They could have been
Mm.
over confident, but confident in the wrong
In the wrong
place.
thing, putting faith in the wrong place.
Right. Um, so whatever their going astray was, Jesus is bringing them back to saying, look, you don't need a lot of faith here. Faith, the mustard seed was the smallest seed that they dealt with,
Mm.
right? That they were aware of. And so he's saying, you don't need to have like crazy faith. You just need to put it in me and obey, right?
Mm. Oh, you know what? I'm recognizing a place where sometimes I would have no faith. You know, I can be quite judgmental. And sometimes, I could look at a certain person or I could look at somebody living a certain lifestyle and I could think they can't be saved. Why should I witness to them?
Mm,
And you know what? This would be a situation where maybe I need a mustard seed of faith
yeah.
because that's where God he wants to show himself to everyone. He wants to show his glory. He wants people to understand how he showed them love. And so why am I so faithless to
Right.
say that these things cannot be done?
Absolutely. And you're getting in the right category of where we are to trust God. Like
Mm,
these, so again, back to the immediate context is Jesus had given them direct instruction, like this is my will. This is
yeah,
what I want to happen, and this is what I want you to be a part of. This is your part to play in
of
my kingdom,
course.
right?
Get to work.
Exactly. So um, so they could be confident. They
Mm,
could pray believing. They could like all of this stuff because they knew exactly what God's will was. And what you referred to is exactly the same thing. Like it is God's will that all hear, that
right,
all know the goodness of God, that are all exposed to the good news and to the good life of a changed person living in front
right,
of them. Like that is God's will for all. And so to pray for those things and to obey in those areas is exactly what we're called to do. And we should expect mountains to move, right?
right.
We should expect to see wild things happen that we never expected or never could even categorize. Like it's just
Right. Things that we cannot do, really.
right,
But God behind the scenes, he moves the mountain of maybe somebody's hard heart.
right. And
Yeah.
it so in this context, in the Matthew passage, that the person who asked the question was referring to this one specifically because of the passage they quoted. Um, in this passage, you're talking about basically defeating the spiritual powers that be, because that's what was happening. This is what the disciples were called to do. It's what they failed to
Right.
do. And Jesus is encouraging them to have just a little faith in the right place and obey.
Mm.
And you're going to see that
See some
God,
big changes.
that's right. Um, there are other times that Jesus used the same language. One of them is in Luke, and the interesting thing there, and maybe this will be more practical for some of those that are listening or watching, um, is the context there was not demon possession or dealing with the spiritual world. It was dealing with forgiveness.
Oof.
So Jesus gives us
Oof.
instruction on forgiveness
That's
and
hard,
how
Greg.
we're to forgive like 70 times 7. In other words, we need to be unlimited in our forgiveness, just like
Mm.
he is unlimited in his, right?
Wow.
And in that context, the disciples say, well, help our faith. In other words, they're saying, I don't want to do that,
Yeah,
right?
that's hard.
Yeah. And Jesus then talks again about this. He just having a little faith, but he doesn't talk about mountains this time. He says you can say to this tree, be moved out in the ocean or whatever, and it's just gonna, float off, right? And again, we're talking about hyperbole. Jesus isn't commanding us to go out and talk to mountains or talk to trees. What he's saying is, when I've called you to do something
Mm.
and I'm with you in it, right?
Right.
Don't say you can't do it.
Mm.
Don't say it can't be done. Just have a little faith and a lot of obedience, and I'll take care of the rest.
Right.
Right. And
So it falls into those confines. We're starting to kind of clarify. So when we have these faith, how is it? In what sense is it? And it always seems to be things that we're called to by God.
yes. And it's when we're called to participate with what God is currently doing.
Mm. So it's
Um,
not specifically like it's not specifically about the mountain moving. It's not about the things that I just want. It's about, all right, so God has called this. He has told us that we are going to participate in this. And
mhm.
so when we participated in faith, that's when we would see that action.
Right. And the repeated thing that Jesus clarifies again with that's why he says faith like a mustard seed. It's not about the quantity or quality of our faith. It's about where
Mm,
it's put and that we act on it even if we don't believe. right?
Mm,
Even if we doubt. And if you go to the illustration of all of the uh the heroes of our faith in Hebrews 11, and you look at how they trusted God, a lot of times they weren't convinced, but they
right.
obeyed anyway, right?
Yeah.
Like Sarah was not convinced she could have a child, right?
No.
But she still slept with Abraham,
Yep.
right? Right? She still she still obeyed.
Mm,
Um, and God worked,
God
even
provided.
though it was just the faith of a mustard seed,
Right.
right? It wasn't the quantity or quality of her faith, it was where it was put, and that she acted as if God was going to keep his word, even though she wasn't sure if he could or would.
Mm,
That is the kind of faith, like this, the bar, Jesus is putting it pretty low, right?
right.
And saying, don't think you got to be this great hero in faith. It's like,
Just just do it. You don't
just
even
do it.
need you can even be doubting when you do it, but do it.
That's right.
Wow.
And then you'll see these amazing things happen.
Mm,
Um, and like in the forgiveness illustration, like which is harder, forgiving somebody who has abused you and wronged you, or
mm.
saying to a tree, be moved into the ocean? I would say saying to the tree, be moved into the ocean is actually easier.
It's not as emotionally
Yes. Right?
difficult for me, no.
Right. But Jesus is saying, look, I'm all about forgiveness.
Mm,
And if you're with me, you're all about forgiveness too.
right.
And if you believe me, start forgiving,
Wow.
and mountains are going to move.
That
Trees are going to go
reminds me.
flying.
That reminds me of a story. I've been listening to the Bible Project podcast on and off, and they did a fantastic series on the Sermon on the Mount. And one specific story that they tell is actually about Corrie Ten Boom, who lived during the Second World War, and she and her sister went to a concentration camp because they were hiding Jews during the genocide,
Mhm.
and horrible mistreatment for her and her sister in these concentration camps. And I believe, if my memory serves me well, her sister dies in the concentration camp. They're like all human decency is gone, taken away, and these soldiers enforcing that. And Corey tells a story of afterwards, after she's set free, she's preaching, and she notices she's preaching on forgiveness, and in the crowd she sees one of the officers
Mhm.
from the concentration camp.
Mhm.
And afterwards, they come up to her and they say, I know that God has forgiven me, but I want to hear it from you too. Would you forgive me for what I did? And Corey, she writes this, kind of talking about the 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 feelings of the hurt
Mhm.
coming back, those memories coming back. And despite the doubt and the frustration, you know, she does finally extend her hand to shake this person's hand, forgiving them. And she doesn't believe it. She doubts it's possible, but she does. She goes to
Mhm.
extend her hand, and it's when those hands meet that she describes that God's own power she recognizes in that forgiveness that she doubts, that she so difficult. That is a mountain.
Yeah.
That is a
Yeah.
mountain that's moved.
And I would say that is more miraculous
More
than
miraculous in a
a
hundred
mountain
years.
moving. Yeah.
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 So that's
And
fascinating. So when it comes to the things that we're called to, when it comes to forgiving, when it comes to um, specifically with these spiritual powers that we can't see. Well, this is for the disciples in this situation.
right.
Um, we just need to have a little faith and go for it.
And it can apply in so many areas, maybe somebody has the gift of helping and they don't feel they've got the energy right?
Mm,
Or the desire to help anymore. You know what I mean? Like it can
right.
be somebody with the gift of teaching or whatever, but God has called you or me to something, and maybe we're faithless. Maybe we're refusing to believe that God would use me or he would use you or um that it makes a difference or
Mm,
whatever. And um Jesus saying like just
mm,
just have a tiny little bit. Come on,
right.
just a little bit of faith, enough to obey, and
Mm,
I'll move the mountain. The thing that you think is impossible, I'll do that for you. But
wow.
but come play on my team, right? Be on my
Right.
side. Yeah.
So where does prayer come into this? When it comes to like say for example, there is something that you recognize. You recognize, okay, so there's this thing and I just so believe it needs to be done. How much do I pray about it?
So this one, I got no sweet clue. Okay, like this is this is this is hard because it's so unique to every situation,
Right.
and you can go whatever you want to believe about this, you can believe because there's a scripture for it, right? So,
Right.
so, so even if we think about this whole like the disciples and the confronting the spiritual world, in one of the places when Jesus was talking to his disciples because they weren't able to be successful in that, he said, you know, some I'll paraphrase, but some demons are so strong that you need to pray and fast. In other words, you need to
Mm,
be in continual prayer. It's this is not just God, please help me, and it's going to happen. You need to like dig in
mm,
and so that would indicate that in more difficult times you need more prayer. But then you've got
yeah.
other situations where, like I think it was Nehemiah. He's in a spot where he just says a little like 3 second prayer, and God does
Mm.
crazy things, like moves huge mountains, right?
Yeah, for him.
For him,
Right.
um, you've got Paul praying 3 times,
Mm,
and then God doesn't answer the way he wants after all 3 times. He's like, "Okay, I'm done praying for that."
right.
God said no. He didn't answer. So it's really complicated to know um, in this situation how much prayer does the amount of prayer.
Like what is the prayer to work ratio or the
Yes.
prayer to
Yeah.
change
We need
ratio?
to come up some math with some math for that, right? Like we
Right.
can make a nice little equation for,
I don't know if
if
there's
you
an
want
equation
a
for it, is the
job, this
thing.
is how long you pray and God will
Yeah.
answer. And if you just need a raise, well, that only takes this much
That's
prayer.
actually
Like,
three prayers for this long. And no, and
yeah,
yeah, I know from maybe I can talk a little bit about it in my life. Like there are things that I recognize and I pray about. And I think when it comes to that personal prayer, I think those specific things, they are, I think they're often linked to my spiritual growth in ways that I don't see, in ways that I don't understand. And so, sometimes I'll pray, God, I know that it would be your will for me to um, do the things that you want me to do. So God, help me do the things that you want me to do.
mm,
Um, and I know that that's something that God will answer. And in the way, I don't know how that's going to happen until it happens. Um, but I don't know. I think it's linked very much to our personal
yeah,
selves. And I don't know.
I agree 100%. To me, my view on prayer has shifted a lot over the years, and where my mind currently is, I think the vast majority of my prayer life, I'll speak for myself, but I think this should be true of all of us, is I think the biggest part of prayer is not trying to make God align with our will,
Mm,
but it's us aligning with his will.
right.
I think I think the majority of our prayer should be going to God with things that we know already what his answer is. We know already what his heart is for in the situation. And yes, asking for it, but again, it's like Jesus' words, like not my will, but yours be done.
Mm,
Like that I think is huge. And when we okay, let's make it practical. Like let's say that we're praying for a coworker.
right,
Um, we know God's will is
right.
for that person to be exposed to his goodness,
Of course.
right? We know that God wants that person's heart to be open to the good news of Jesus and the cross and forgiveness and the way we're made right with God. We know what God's will is, right? So if we continually pray instead of just praying once and say, ah, I already prayed for them, right?
Mm,
Well, let's look at it two ways. Let's say I pray for my coworker once. In
right.
this case, it's you, Matt. So I don't know what's wrong in your life, but no.
I am messed up, Greg. I do need to be honest.
So
I'm not perfect.
so to pray for your coworker once, um, that's significant and all, but that coworker is not going to be top of mind for you if
Mm,
you've only prayed for them once. And your alignment with God's heart isn't going to be progressively moving together if you only pray once.
mm,
But if you pray for that person every day or multiple times a day, all of a sudden your awareness of God's working in that person's life
it's
is
heightened,
tweaked. It's
right?
heightened, right? And you're looking for it. And you're even open to, hey, God, if I'm part of you working in his life,
Show me
like
where it is. Put me
show
there.
me, right? And the more you pray for that coworker, the more your heart and God's heart are aligned, and the more that you're able to see God's Spirit working and Him opening doors and closing doors, and all of a sudden you either you yourself can be part of that working, or you get to witness the miraculous
Mm,
of that person having a neighbor move next door that's a believer, and you see,
right.
right? You get to see God working and answering the prayer. And so I guess the bottom line to this is it never hurts to keep on praying. Like Jesus
No,
made this
never.
point with the parable story of the I think it was a widow with the unjust judge,
Oh, right.
and talking and commending her in never giving up, like pestering the judge. um, and Jesus says, like, come on, your heavenly Father is better than that unjust judge. Like,
Right.
he actually wants your good. So go to him with everything and don't stop
Mm,
praying. Like, don't give up.
right.
And so I think if we're gonna make a mistake, make the mistake of praying too much.
Right.
Let's not make the mistake of praying too little.
100%.
Um, here's my take or my opinion on when we are to just ask once, twice, three times, and then let it go.
Mm,
And I think that's in the areas where we don't know what God's will is.
right.
It's in an area that He hasn't promised us.
Mm,
And then we need to be willing to accept a no for an answer. And that's what Paul did, right?
right.
Like, Paul didn't know what God's will was for healing his physical body, like his blindness, probably seizures, and all the other head injury related stuff that he was struggling with every day. He didn't know what God's will was, but he asked, right?
Mm,
And he asked multiple times, and the response he got in the however God communicated to him, like, was the answer's no, and my strength is
sufficient.
sufficient, right? It's
Right.
made perfect in weakness. And and so now his faith and prayer was focused on living with these limitations, right?
Mm,
Letting God use these limitations instead of asking for God to take the limitations away.
mm.
So that takes real
Takes real faith
faith,
too.
wisdom.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, God is so good. And yeah, I forgot about that parable of the unjust judge. I think that's a great way to think about it. Um, and so you know what? I think we at the beginning of the prayer question, we weren't sure we could have an answer, but you know what? We almost answered it, I'd say.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is a testament to our podcast, questions and almost answers. Greg, did you have any final thoughts? Any final feelings?
I guess just to for all of us to remember that God has a distinctive will and plan
That's right.
for this time and for our lives. And our entire being should be caught up in participating with that.
Yeah.
And even if we're not convinced that it'll work or convinced that it's the best or whatever, let's give up on on that mindset
Let's
and
have a
say,
mustard seed.
yep,
Yeah.
just a tiny bit of faith, put in the right place. And the other side of the coin of faith is obedience. And let's just obey, even if we don't see how it's going to work,
Amen.
and let God do what God does.
That's right. If you have any questions about faith, maybe about, well, what is God's will? Ask us in the comments. We'd love to answer. We'd love to talk about these things. If you enjoy our discussions and you want to hear the next one, if you subscribe, if you follow on Spotify or Apple Music, hey, these will be delivered right to your inbox when they're ready. So if you want to check these out in the future, please keep coming back. But thank you so much for watching. My name is Matt. This is Greg, and this has been Questions and Almost Answers.